I know exactly how my house is laid out, and I don't mean that in the casual way people usually say it. I mean, I could walk through it in complete darkness and never once hesitate. I could count every step between rooms, tell you where each wall begins and ends, and point to the exact spot where the floor creaks without needing to test it. I have lived here for 12 years, and in all that time, nothing about it has ever changed. Not the position of the doors, not the length of the hallway, not the number of steps on the staircase. There are 6 doors on the ground floor: the front door, the kitchen, the living room, the bathroom, the storage closet, and the back door. 6. It has always been 6, and that certainty used to comfort me in a way I never questioned. So when I opened a 7th, I didn't feel confusion first. I felt something much worse. I felt a kind of cold, immediate certainty that something impossible had just happened, and that whatever caused it understood my house better than I did. It started 3 nights before I understood what I was dealing with. I woke up because of a sound, something soft and careful, like a piece of furniture being nudged just slightly across the floor. It wasn't loud enough to alarm me, but it was precise enough to feel intentional. The kind of sound that doesn't belong to a house settling or pipes adjusting, but something quieter and more deliberate. I checked the time out of the habit and saw 2:13 a.m. glowing faintly on my clock, and I remember staring at it longer than usual, as if the numbers themselves meant something I couldn't quite understand. I lay there listening, expecting the sound to repeat, but the house returned to complete stillness, the kind that feels too perfect to be natural. Eventually, I convinced myself it was nothing more than an overactive imagination pulling meaning out of silence, and I got up to get water. Everything felt normal at first. The hallway outside my room stretched exactly as it should, the faint creak in the 3rd floorboard greeting me like it always did. I walked down the stairs, my hand brushing along the railing, counting steps without thinking. 11 down, then the small landing, then 7 more. It was automatic, familiar, grounding, but when I reached the bottom and turned toward the kitchen, that sense of certainty collapsed instantly. There was a door where there shouldn't have been one, set neatly into a wall I knew led to the outside. For a few seconds, I didn't move at all. My brain refused to process what I was seeing, like it was waiting for the image to correct itself, to snap back into something logical. The door looked completely ordinary, the same wood, the same handle, the same faint wear along the edges. It didn't look new, and that was the problem. It looked like it had always been there, like I had somehow forgotten it existed. But I hadn't. I knew that wall. I knew what was behind it, or rather, what wasn't. There was no space for a room, no hidden extension, nothing but the outside of the house. I walked closer slowly, my eyes fixed on it, and when I reached out and touched it, the surface felt solid and cool, as real as any other door I had ever opened. The handle turned slightly under my grip when I tested it, smooth and familiar. I stood there longer than I should have, caught between curiosity and something deeper that I couldn't name, and in the end, I chose not to open it. Instead, I stepped back, forcing myself to accept the simplest explanation, that I was still half asleep, that this was a dream that felt more convincing than usual. I turned around, went back upstairs, and lay in bed staring at the ceiling until morning. By the time the sun came up, the door was gone. I checked immediately, going downstairs without even thinking about anything else. The wall was flat and uninterrupted, exactly as it had always been, with no trace of what I had seen. I ran my hand across it, pressing lightly, searching for any sign that something had been there, but there was nothing. No seam, no mark, nothing to suggest that the house had changed at all. I told myself it had been a dream, and for a few hours I almost believed it. That belief didn't survive the next night. I woke again at exactly 2:13 a.m., but this time there was no sound to explain it. My eyes opened suddenly, completely, as if something had pulled me out of sleep with intention. The room felt different, heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. I sat up slowly, listening to the silence, and this time, it didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, like something unseen was holding it in place. Without fully deciding to, I got out of bed and walked toward the stairs, drawn by a quiet certainty I couldn't explain. When I reached the ground floor, the door had returned. It stood in the same place as before, unchanged, as if it had never disappeared at all. This time, I didn't hesitate for long. I stepped up to it, my heart beating faster than I wanted to admit, and turned the handle. The door opened inward, revealing a hallway that could not possibly exist within the structure of my house. It stretched forward farther than the exterior dimensions would allow, narrow and dimly lit, with walls and flooring identical to everything I knew. It didn't look foreign or separate. It looked like an extension, like a part of the house that had been hidden until now. I stepped inside, feeling the temperature drop slightly as I crossed the threshold. The air was colder in a subtle, creeping way that settled into my skin rather than shocking it. I turned back briefly to make sure the door was still there, and it was, standing open behind me as if waiting. Then I began to walk. The hallway extended far beyond what made sense, and I found myself counting steps again out of instinct. 10, 15, 20, and still it continued, stretching in a way that felt less like distance and more like something adjusting itself as I moved. Eventually, I reached another door and stood in front of it for a moment before opening it. On the other side was my living room, or something very close to it. Everything was there, but nothing was exactly right. The couch was angled slightly differently, the table sat closer to the wall, and the bookshelf was missing books I knew should have been there. It looked like a careful imitation built from memory, accurate in structure, but flawed in detail. I stepped inside slowly, my eyes moving across every familiar object, trying to find something that would anchor me, something that would prove this wasn't real. The clock on the wall read 2:13 a.m., unmoving, and in that moment I understood that this wasn't a dream. Dreams don't hold their shape under scrutiny, and they don't remain consistent when examined closely. From that point on, I stopped trying to explain it and started observing it instead. Every night, I stayed awake until 2:13 a.m., waiting for the shift. Sometimes I felt it before it happened, a subtle pressure in the air, like the house was quietly rearranging itself just beyond perception. Each time, something was different. Sometimes the door returned, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes the hallway stretched longer than it should, or a wall felt farther away than I remembered. Once, the staircase had an extra step, and I nearly stumbled because my body expected the landing to come sooner. These changes were never dramatic enough to be obvious to someone unfamiliar, but to me, they were impossible to ignore. I began documenting everything, drawing the layout of the house each night in careful detail. At first, I thought I might be making mistakes, that my memory was failing me in subtle ways. But when I compared the drawings in the morning, they never matched. Not once. Walls shifted, rooms expanded or contracted, and doors appeared or vanished without any pattern I could predict. Yet despite all these changes, the house always remained navigable. It never trapped me, never broke itself into something unusable. It adapted, rearranged, and continued functioning as if guided by an unseen logic that I couldn't understand but could feel watching me. Eventually, curiosity overtook caution, and I started exploring deeper into the spaces that appeared at night. I found hallways that looped in ways that should have been impossible, spaces that seemed to fold back into themselves, and rooms that were too large to fit within the structure of the house. Some rooms looked almost identical to ones I knew, but something would always be off. A window would show a view that didn't match the outside, or a piece of furniture would be positioned just slightly wrong, like a copy made without full understanding. The more I explored, the more it felt like the house wasn't just changing randomly, but trying to recreate itself over and over again, getting closer each time but never perfect. I began marking these places to keep track of them. Small scratches near door frames, objects placed at precise angles, anything that would help me recognize whether I had been somewhere before. At first, The marks remained exactly where I left them, giving me a sense of control, a way to navigate the shifting layout. But after a few nights, I started noticing that some of the marks were gone. Entire sections would reset, replaced by versions that looked similar but lacked the details I had added. It felt like the house was correcting itself, removing evidence, refining its structure in ways that made it harder for me to understand what was happening. There were moments when I thought about leaving, about just walking out of the house and never coming back, but something about that felt impossible. Not physically impossible, but mentally. The idea never fully formed into action. It was like the house had become a closed system, something I was already too far inside to escape in any meaningful way. So instead, I kept observing, kept documenting, kept trying to find a pattern that would explain what I was experiencing. Then came the night that changed everything. I woke up before 2:13 a.m., which had never happened before. The clock read 2:11, and I was already fully awake, staring at the ceiling with a sense of dread I couldn't explain. The air felt heavier than it ever had, thick and unmoving, like the entire house was holding its breath. I sat up slowly, listening, and for the first time since this began, I heard something before the time arrived. It wasn't a distant noise or a subtle shift. It was movement, clear and deliberate, coming from somewhere downstairs. When the clock turned to 2:13, the sound stopped instantly. The silence that followed was overwhelming, pressing in from all sides. I stayed where I was for a long moment before forcing myself to stand. My body didn't want to move, but something deeper pushed me forward, the same pull that had led me to the door every other night. When I reached the ground floor, the door was already open. I hadn't touched it. The hallway beyond it looked different, darker and deeper than ever before, like it had expanded beyond anything I had seen so far. The edges of it seemed less defined, as if the structure itself was becoming unstable. I hesitated for longer than usual, but eventually, I stepped inside. The deeper I went, the harder it became to breathe. The air felt thick, resisting each step I took, and the silence was so complete, it felt unnatural. At the end of the hallway, there was a door I had never seen before, slightly open, with darkness spilling out from inside. I approached it slowly, every instinct telling me to turn back, but I didn't. I couldn't. When I pushed the door open, I found myself looking into my bedroom. It was identical in every way, down to the smallest detail. The bed, the sheets, the desk, even the faint marks on the wall that I knew were there. But someone was lying in the bed, sleeping. It was me. There was no doubt about it. The shape, the posture, the way the blanket rose and fell with each breath, it was all exactly right. I stood there, unable to move, my mind trying and failing to process what I was seeing. After a few seconds, the figure shifted slightly, not enough to wake, but enough to feel aware. The movement wasn't random. It felt like a response, like it had sensed something nearby. And then it stopped breathing. Not suddenly, not violently, just paused. The stillness that followed was worse than anything before. It stretched on for too long enough for me to realize that something had changed. Slowly, very slowly, the figure in the bed began to turn, not toward the door, toward where I was standing. I stepped back immediately, my heart slamming against my chest, a cold wave of panic washing over me. I didn't wait to see its face. I turned and walked back down the hallway, faster than I ever had before, every part of me screaming to run, but something deeper holding me back. It felt like running would make it worse, like it would confirm something I didn't want acknowledged. When I reached the door and stepped back into my house, I closed it behind me and stood there, listening. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard it. The sound from the other side. Soft. Close. Like something had reached the door just as I shut it. I went upstairs slowly, each step heavier than the last, and when I reached my room, I stopped in the doorway. The bed was empty, exactly as I'd left it, but the sheets were disturbed in a way that made my stomach tighten, They weren't just shifted. They looked used, like someone had been lying there recently. Since that night, I haven't gone back at 2:13 a.m., but I still wake up at that time. And now, the sounds don't stay downstairs. They move. They follow the same paths I used to walk, with the same familiarity I once had. Every night, I hear them a little closer than before, a little more certain, as if whatever is moving through the house is learning it the way I once did. Last night, the footsteps reached the stairs. I heard them pause at the bottom, just like I used to, and then begin to climb. 11 steps came first, slow and steady, followed by a pause that felt deliberate, like something remembering the pattern, and then 7 more steps that brought the sound right outside my door. I lay there completely still, every muscle locked in place, listening to the presence just beyond the wood. This time, it didn't hesitate. The handle began to turn slowly, carefully, like someone who already knew the door would open. And just before it did, I realized something I hadn't understood until that moment. The layout of my house isn't what's changing, it's learning. If this felt real, that's because it was almost real. I'll see you in the next memory.